So yeah, it's awesome to have you here, especially since your expertise, for those that don't know you, is of course video games, both the software and the hardware. Everyone check out Adam Koralik. The link is in the description. You won't regret it. He put out a really awesome video only yesterday that I know Culture Casino was a huge fan of.
Yes.
So check it out, and that's brilliant because today, the topic of today is comic book movies. And are they going away? No, of course they're not going away. But maybe, just maybe, they're not going to be as prevalent in the next few years as they have been this past decade. What with Marvel going to the dogs and DC in the process of actively being torn down, and then it remains to be seen how it will be built back up again. Is it going to rise from the ashes like a phoenix? Or is it just going to keep on simmering? That we do not know. What we do know, though, is that there's plenty video game movies that really want to try to take over the handle. We are on Amazon. We have both Warhammer. We have Gear of War. We're going to have a whole Sega cinematic universe that's already started with Sonic. And next year, we also have Super Mario, which both Tom and I think is going to be among the biggest movies of the year, especially for the kids. Look out for that one. So, yeah, that's a little bit of what we'll be discussing today. But before we begin with the continued demolition of DC, let's start with some of these super chats.
But speaking of toys and being ahead of the curve, we have another guest joining us, and who may have something to say about this. Mr. Pro, WDW, that is.
Well, I didn't mean to be rude and hop in when I can't stay very long, but you guys were covering a topic that I was just amazed because I don't think that I've ever talked about that. One of my sources in merchandising has said that Nintendo is currently perceived to be one of the biggest competitors going forward to Disney for merchandising because they're already so well suited with interconnected IPs. So the Mario world is interconnected with Zelda, interconnected with Donkey Kong. And so companies look at that, these third-party merchandisers, and they see just vast potential. The other thing that is interesting is the perhaps renaissance of Sega if Sega can just get out of their own way. And surprisingly, that's also true of Nintendo, according to the source that I have about this. But I was just flabbergasted to see this because I didn't know, has there been something that's come out that you guys were reporting on, or is this coming from your own sources or intuitions? Fill me in on this.
I can answer that real quick before you carry on. We already know that the Nintendo movie is happening. And Tom and I, we have both discussed how that movie is going to be freaking huge because we haven't done any research, but we have circumstantial evidence in both our real lives to suggest, yes, we have kids. We have kids. And just based on that, especially with my own daughter and all her friends and everything like that, Mario is king. Luigi is hot. Everyone digs Mario Kart 8. That Super Mario movie, that's going to be a freaking beast because they have the imagination of the kids. Right. Like Nintendo Switches, and Adam, you can speak to this.
Yep.
Those things, they just keep on selling. I mean, I trust that no one is going to spoil this to my close family, but I was thinking, when the Switch came out, no way am I ever buying that. Well, guess what I bought as a Christmas present only 3 hours ago?
Because you got a kid.
Yes.
So what I have been hearing, and I guess this goes back about 2 or 3 weeks, was when this came into me, is that companies have long wanted to do deals with Nintendo as well as Sega. Now, Sega is clearly much farther down the list in terms of what they can provide because of how old their intellectual properties are. They have quite a few that have been dormant since Sega. Sorry, I started to say Disney out of habit, but since Sega has been out of the console game, which has been 20 years now. And they did not do a good job of necessarily maintaining their franchises, such as Phantasy Star, Knights, Crazy Taxi,
Pretty much
you keep
everything
going and
but
going.
Sonic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
trust me when I say I
really-
can elaborate on that a lot. But yeah, go
No,
ahead.
go
Yeah.
for it. This is the
No,
time.
let him go. Let him go. I'll listen.
Well,
I
yeah,
agree
no,
with him.
and
I agree with everything he's saying so far, by the way.
So here's what is being said is that despite these companies, the third party toy makers, the third party merch creators, despite them being very excited about the idea of piggybacking off of Sega and far more off of Nintendo, there is an issue there that has always been a problem, and that is consistency. And the consistency comes from if they go to a company like Disney. Disney may offer them a contract that is far less appealing, but Disney will also have an absolute roadmap and they will stick with the character Bibles and the franchise Bibles that they create. Excuse me. And so then the companies have sort of safeguards in place that they don't have to worry about things suddenly changing, especially in a market where they're looking 12 months out minimum on bringing different goods to the big box retailers. But when it comes to Nintendo and Sega, these companies often are sort of in creative turmoil. They cannot stay as consistent as these other companies would like for them to do. And so it's been a learning curve out of Japan, particularly as they realize that they have to be able to provide a rock solid 2-year plan minimum to these other companies so that they don't pull the rug out from underneath them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think a big part of the whole thing was like, because we were talking about the differences, because Andre's right. There has always been remakes and readaptations in history. That's not new. But what's different now is like everything is like, I asked somebody, what's the last new IP or franchise that we've had that's been successful? Pretty much the only thing people could think of is John Wick. And that's already a decade old almost. So, or is it a decade old actually? What was it? When did the first one come out now? 2000.
Getting there.
I was gonna say 2013 or something like that. I think it was. So yeah, and again, and this is what I think the difference is here. And Dave was hitting on the point was what I was getting to too, and that is that he says here there's something unique about the longevity of the appeal of the 80s and early 90s. There was a ubiquity of that pop culture, the internet, cable, TV, broadcast, and market into all many subcultures. That is something I brought up too, and let me get to that. First of all, we are the videotape generation, right? And this goes to what you were saying, Adam, about the 80s and 90s, especially. Mm-hmm. We were the ones that were the first time we had the ability to watch whatever we wanted, whenever the fuck we wanted. And we never had that before. Not only that, we were able to watch these movies over and over and over again and basically memorize them. So that I think is a part of where we're rooted in this whole idea of that. Because you're right, because before that in the 70s, what those guys were having nostalgia for, like Spielberg and George Lucas and all that kind of stuff, was stuff from their childhood, which bred like Star Wars, for instance. But the difference was now those are the things they're doing instead of making their own Star Wars, right? See, because that was out of the fact that George Lucas couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, so he just decided, fuck it, I'm going to make my own, right? And that's what we're missing is you don't have those guys going, fuck it, I'm going to make my own. We don't have that anymore. That's what I think we're missing big time. So instead, they'd rather just make one of those.
Now what you have is like, fuck it, I watched this as a kid. I want to enjoy it as an adult. How do I make it more mature? Like Power Rangers for adults. Yeah, I completely get it.
That's what I was trying to say because, yeah, exactly. Because like, before that, like nostalgia was kind of spotty at best prior to the 80s because you're right. Just because going off of what that message was, the fact that it just permeated culture so much more than it ever had before. Because we had the networks, everybody had a unified viewing experience. Movies were being released on a national level now instead of, district to district like they used to be in before the 70s. And so that changed a lot of stuff, especially with the invention of the video age, which to me, we are the video generation.
We're nostalgic. We're nostalgic for a store that provided videos. Blockbuster. I mean, we think about
exactly. Yeah, not just.
I've got multiple videos.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've got multiple videos on Blockbuster. There's one left. I've been to it. I've done videos. I was the host of the 3rd Blockbuster World Championship only a few weeks ago. Like, I get it. I'm intertwined in the Blockbuster and all that.
And the same thing can be said for the nostalgia of consoles, right?
Yeah.
And I saw a similar video the other day. And this is also kind of what got me down to this path. It kind of solidified my opinion on it, or why I think my theory is correct, is the same thing you can see in gaming. because the video was about why did the PlayStation Mini fail when the Sega and the Nintendo Minis were huge successes, and it was just that we're not yet quite there where that nostalgic bug has come yet for the Sony PlayStation.
I would also argue it was just the technical failures of the
there was
device.
that too. That did not help.
Yeah, but the timing was a little early. Yeah.
Yeah, we're because you're just getting to this point where some people are like, oh, we'd love to have, you know, like an N64 mini. Yeah, Nintendo's right. They know just wait just a couple more years, and those kids will be the right age to buy their kids a mini N64 and get all nostalgic with their kids. Because that's the other part of it, right? Is you rediscovering it and then sharing it with your children, right? Because that's what makes these things generational, which is something Andre has pointed out, which Star Trek and Star Wars have basically killed, is their generational ability to pass these things on. Because Star Trek has actually managed to get past through what now, 3 generations or 4?
Yeah, pretty much. And also, just on that note, with the Nintendo Switch, I can't wait to get in on that Sonic Mania. Pass that on to a new generation.
Do you actually mean Sonic Mania the game?
It's got both meanings.
Oh, because it's 2 meanings. Did you just mean the concept of Never mind. It's a good game. Play Sonic Mania.
I get what he's
Speaking about Sonic Mania, though, that goes straight to the heart of what these third parties are so worried about.
Yes.
Think about just how stupid the leadership at Sega must be. You have a hit game that comes out, you have the team in place to pump out sequel after sequel, and you will make so much money off of Sonic Mania. And because of hubris, in terms of wanting their own team, their own Sonic team to succeed, they essentially kill off that team that they've just established. They kill off the goodwill that they have, and they don't produce a Sonic Mania 2. They go with this latest Sonic game that came out, which has got mixed reviews and shows potential. But why in the world would you not go head first into producing more of those Sonic Mania games? It's just instant gold. You're going to get the money. There's no worries about it. People would have loved it.
Do you mean like literally Sonic Mania? Because again, that game was in development by a guy named Christian Whitehead for like 7 years.
So Christian Whitehead, yeah, and Headcanon Games and all that sort of thing. The thing was that once you had that team established, and part of that development cycle that you're talking about that was so long came from the fact that they were recreating this old engine and developing these what would you call them? These reimaginings of the old games, except for the HD screen, etc.
I guess we'd call it a soft reboot in film terms.
Sure.
Yeah.
But once you had that team in place, and once you had all the machinery in place to be able to reproduce these 2D games that are incredible pixel art, then it just makes sense that even if it was going to take you 2 or 3 years to create a completely new Sonic 2D game, it's all there waiting for you to go with it. I know is it T. Lopes? Is that the name of the composer who was behind it? Who was just incredible? He was a musician who created all the music, and it was fantastic. And yet Sega, because they're problematic to work with, they completely jettisoned that they had just built and went in a completely different direction.
Yeah, Sega has a famously odd corporate structure. I've worked with them on a few things, and long story short, everything has to go to Sega of Japan's approval, and it has to go through what we call Japanese layer cake, which is like 10 people on the bottom have to approve and then kick it up to 8, and those 8 have to approve and then kick it up to 6, and they have to, and so on and so forth. And that process can take longer than makes any sense in Western perspectives.
Yeah, I don't know too much about exactly what's going on with Sonic and stuff like that. What I will say is that I was a huge Sonic fan in the 90s for the Sega Mega Drive games, including the Mega CD one, and then I fell completely out after that, because then it became like this RPG thing running around in Soliana and what have you. And
blast processing.
Yeah, well, those were the good days. Like Sonic and blast processing, they kind of go hand in hand, because like Sonic is perfect for like that 2D thing, and I didn't care for Sonic 4 because the physics and gravity of it was all wrong. That completely ruined the experience for that. And then I didn't care again until Sonic Mania, which is a fantastic game. That's right up there with the best of them. And I will also say that with which I agree that Sega, they should have fired everyone. Just that Christian Whitehead, or what his name is, just deal with that. We should be on Sonic Mania 2 right now, or have that coincide with Sonic the Movie Part 3 if they were really clever and did an integrated strategy.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because Sonic the Hedgehog 4 is what inspired Sonic Mania to exist, because Christian Whitehead released his own like fan-made Sonic game the same time as Sonic 4, and everybody thought it was better than the official Sonic game. So publicly they were like, hey, you got to take that down, and then privately they hired him. That's how you got Sonic Mania.
Yeah. Totally worth.
So I think it's cool. Oh, I agree. And I totally agree that where's Sonic Mania 2? Like that should have just been like an obvious, okay, money train, everybody's happy, let's just keep this going. Where?
Well, it sells on every platform you have, right? Yeah. It would have been on every single platform. It's easily transferred over to mobile. And that's what all these game companies are wanting. So, you know, why you would not do that? It's not business acumen that would lead you to say, hey, let's go in a completely different direction and try to reinvent the AAA experience of a 3D Sonic and copycat Zelda Breath of the Wild to some degree. You know, why would you do that? Why would you not create Sonic based on the best parts of it? And here's another thing too. There's another fan game out there. I can't think of what it's called, but it's a 3D sandbox Sonic game where he's back in Green Hill and momentum matters and all of that. Somebody in chat will remember it, but it came out maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and all Sega has to do is emulate that style of gameplay, and again, they would be rolling in money. Now, you guys were talking earlier about what has been the causal factors resulting in entertainment not being as good today as it was. And so I'd like to give 2 things that I think caused entertainment to become boring and redundant and so dependent on sequels and existing franchises and lacking creativity. And those 2 things are, in my opinion, that you had California, largely Southern California, producing entertainment, and it had to go through that Southern California filter. So everything had to go into what we might disparagingly call the woke culture, wokeism. But at the same time that it's going through that filter, it had to go through another filter that is so vastly different that the spectrum of what could be created becomes tiny. And that other filter is that all of these companies, for the last decade, until just the last couple of years, were chasing China. So if you think about, you want to produce material that pleases those who are part of the woke culture of Southern California, and you want to produce material that is pleasing to the Chinese Communist Party, therefore you can get into the Middle Kingdom. Well, the material that can come out of those 2 disparate cultural ideas is going to be minuscule. And so I think that's what really just narrowed the field of what was possible to be created. And I also think that's why people began to build upon these existing IPs, because they were, at least then you had one of those risk factors negated, because you could say, okay, well, this is already popular, or we think it will be popular. We're not going to start out with something completely new. And now we can focus on how do we fit into these 2 circles where they overlap in this tiny segment, you know, where they overlap, and we can try to focus on these 2 markets. That's my thought on partially what happened.
You know, especially in regards with China, I totally agree. Like, I remember, you know, you sit there and you watch movies like The Martian, and you have, you know, the Matt Damon one, and you sit there and you're like, this is a great movie, or at least I thought it was. And then it's like, you get to this part where it's like very clearly Chinese propaganda, and you just can't help but be like, is this really necessary, like, for the story, or is this just here to get it into theaters? And you know it is. And that kind of just, I think we're going to look back on that era, because it was like 10 years or so of them doing that, right? Like, we're going to look back on that and be like, that was kind of a weird era where everybody was just making these like strangely pro-Chinese movies, at least in like 30% of the film. Transformers 3, I think it was, or was it 4, whatever. You guys know what I'm talking about, obviously.
Yeah, I think it was 4, I think it was. The one with
where
Mark
they just
Wahlberg.
go there. Yeah, where they just go there and they're drinking like Chinese milk or something. Like, I that's all I really remember about that movie. But yeah, or obviously the new Mulan that nobody liked. Yeah,
something about filming near concentration camps just doesn't go over so well.
Yeah.
Yeah, funny that.